Sony, Sony, Sony. They have just been messing up for the past few months. Well, not even the past few months, really just this month. So even though we had something great like Astrobot came out, an absolute phenomenal game. Honestly, it might be my game of the year. And honestly, if you haven't played Astrobot, go play it. It's an amazing game. Absolutely love it. But besides that, a lot of bad news came out of PlayStation. For example, Concord. It was one of Sony's big live service game. A game that's supposed to be supported for years on and years upon years upon years. And it was an absolute flop. So Concord was announced last year with one of the worst teaser trailers ever. It was literally like a ship with like a hamburger, and that's it. Nothing else. So no one knew what the hell this game was, right? No one knew what this game was. And then a year later, we finally had this weird CGI. We had this CGI trailer for Concord, and it was basically bootleg Guardians of the Galaxy. Like, it's literally like we have Guardians of the Galaxy at home. And it had like it had Marvel humor and all of that. And then we saw the game, and it turned out to be a 5v5 hero shooter. A genre of game, hero shooters in particular, that's been like not that popular anymore. Hero shooters is kind of like, I wouldn't say a dead genre, because I know like Overwatch 2 is still relatively popular, but it has hero shooters aren't as popular as they once were. You know, even Overwatch 2, the biggest hero shooter, is struggling right now. And a lot of people don't like that game. And by the way, Overwatch 2 is free to play. This game was $40. $40 for a hero shooter, which was absolutely fucking ridiculous. And one thing is, Sony was like banking on this game to be a big success. Apparently, they spent $400 million on this trash, on this absolutely garbage of a game. That, by the way, from the first trailer, it looked awful. Like, generally, I thought it looked like I had no desire to play it. I remember when the open beta was out, I'm like, I'm not playing this. I'm not going to, like, install this, like, beta, because I know this game is going to be trash. But honestly, I was surprised with how fast this game was taken down. It was like, I want to say a week or two after the game came out that Sony pulled the plug and you can't play it any longer. They gave everyone like refunds, which is absolutely crazy, because we've seen like games that have flopped before, like your Lawbreakers, your Babylon's Fall, your Anthem. But at least it was like Babylon's Fall and Lawbreakers. I believe they both had like a year, right? They had a year before they were shut down, taken offline. This game only had 2 weeks. And then the fact that it cost $400 million to make just makes this thing so much worse for Sony. Because remember, these live service games are like Sony's big push. They're trying to push live service. And yeah, they had a success with Helldivers 2. But this game, Concord, man, it's probably one of the biggest failures in gaming history, you know? It might be one of the biggest gaming flops we've seen in a long, long time. And honestly, I'm fine with it. I don't like these live service games. I really don't. I miss the days of you buy a game, you might have a season pass, but once the season pass is over, it's done. Like old school Call of Duty, like Black Ops 2. You had the Call of Duty Black Ops 2 season pass. You had Call of Duty Black Ops 2. $60 for that game. Then, if you wanted more of the maps, you paid $50, and that's it. But overall, you had a complete game. Now you have games like Modern Warfare 3. You spend $70 on the game, and then there's more stuff you can pay. You can pay like $40 for cosmetics. The amount of money you can spend in that game is absolutely insane. And this is why I just don't like these live service games, because their whole shtick is just to get more money out of you. You know, They're kind of games like Concord is money first. It's not like let's make a fun game. It's like how do we get more money out of people? You know, how do we get people to buy cosmetics, buy these microtransactions, and not just let's make a fun game. You know, because that's like the big issue. A lot of these live service games are just not that fun. But that's not the only big Sony failure of the month, you know? We had this big PS5 Pro reveal. And the PS5 Pro was always this kind of teased thing, probably since the generation started. I feel like we've been hearing about a PS5 Pro. And, you know, I genuinely thought at first, okay, it's going to come out at like $500. They're going to drop the price of the PS5, right? But then after the whole, stock shortages of the PS5, we couldn't really get, it was really hard to get a PS5. They kept the price the same. And it's like, okay, no, if they do release a PS5 Pro, it's probably going to be like $100 more. Probably like discless console $600. And then you pay $100 more to get the disc drive, making it $700 with the disc drive, right? But with this generation, we haven't even seen a price cut like we did with like the PS4, where like once the Slim came out, it dropped the price to $300 for the PS4 Slim. Then they released the PS4 Pro, which took up the original PS4's MSRP of $400. That became the $400 console, right? No, this time we've kind of seen the opposite. The PS5, for example, the PS5 Digital was released at $400, right? But then when the PS5 Slim came out, including the Digital Slim, they jacked the price. It's now $450 for the PS5 Digital instead of that $400. They increased the price. And now this PS5 Pro. By the way, the games they showed off for the PS5 Pro were PS4 games. They highlighted The Last of Us Part 2, a game that came out in 2020 for the PS4. Why would you, for your big Pro console that's meant to be this super powerful console that can play your games in high fidelity with 60 FPS, why would you show The Last of Us Part 2, a PS4 game? Why? When there's games like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, where if you played that game, the 60 FPS mode didn't look good. It was blurry, it wasn't great, and generally, it was not, it ran smooth, but did not look good, While Digital Foundry, they released a video comparing the two, and they said it's a huge difference. It's literally playing the fidelity mode of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth with 60 FPS. It's great. Why didn't they use that? I get it. Sony doesn't publish Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's Square Enix. But couldn't they work something out with Square Enix to say, hey, can we reveal this for our big PS5 Pro showcase? I feel like that would be good because that would be like advertisement for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And we already know it's getting a PS5 Pro patch. So why didn't they find a way to show this off for the big reveal instead of The Last of Us Part 2? And here's the thing. They only showed off old games. Where are the new games coming out? Why would I want to spend $700 on a console without any new games to really play on it? I already have the PS5. And my big issue with the PS5 was the lack of games. Sony hasn't been releasing any games for this thing. Yes, we had Astrobot, which is great. I love Astrobot. We had games like earlier this year, like Stellar Blade and Rise of Ronin. Great games. But a lot of the big first-party Sony studios haven't been releasing games. Sony Santa Monica, they released a PS4 game, God of War Ragnarok. They haven't released a true PS5 game. Naughty Dog haven't released a PS5 game besides The Last of Us Part 1, which is a remake of a game that came out in 2013. They already had a remastered. But yeah, besides that, which doesn't really count. We haven't really seen these big PlayStation first-party studios drop any big games. It's always been they're making some kind of third-party deal or they're working with a second-party games like your Stellar Blade and Horizon Zero Dawn, where they published it, but it's not from one of their big studios, you know, which is like, it's really disappointing because, you know, they were really highlighting about how big of a leap this generation it would be compared to the PS4. I mean, they do that all the time. They always talk about, oh, this generation is so much better than the last. But you see these games that are coming out, and a lot of times they're just remastered of PS4 games, which comes to my next point, where apparently this is rumored for now, getting a Horizon Zero Dawn remastered and a Days Gone remastered, which is like, why? By the way, these two games have 60 FPS patches for their 4K modes. So they both have these kind of PS4 Pro mode that's 30 FPS at, I believe, 1800p or something like that. But once the PS5 came out, they uncapped the frame rate. So it's 1800p at 60 FPS on the PS5. There is no reason for these games. By the way, Days Gone came out in 2019, literally a year before these generation of consoles came out. And Horizon Zero Dawn came out in 2017. Still a pretty good looking game to this day. And it's like, what is Sony doing? Why are they remastering games no one asks for? You know, while there's Bloodborne sitting in a corner begging to at least get a 60 FPS patch. We can't even get a 60 FPS patch for Bloodborne. But instead they want to give us our remastered of Days Gone, our remastered of Horizon Zero Dawn. And it's like, why? Who's asking for these? I get it. Like, in my opinion, Horizon is one of the most mediocre franchises in a long time. Like, honestly, I do not see the hype for those games. I've tried Forbidden West. I couldn't get into it. I thought it was like pretty mid, you know? Not that great. And this is what's my main issue with Sony. They're too complacent. Because let's be honest, Sony has no one to compete with. Nintendo, they're off in the handheld market. They make handheld consoles now. And they're probably never going to, well, I don't know never, but they're probably not going to come back to traditional consoles because they make so much money off their handheld market, especially with the Switch. The Switch is probably good, is already, I believe, Nintendo's most popular console. And there's clearly no reason for them to really abandon that market where they have such a strong foothold in that market where they're untouched. And then there's Xbox. Xbox, I know some fanboys, Xbox fans, might still hold on to the copium that Xbox is still competition, but they're not. For every Xbox sold, there are 2 PlayStation sold. PlayStation is beating them by 2-1, and it's bad. Sony literally has no competition. There's a reason why Sony hasn't been releasing games at all for this generation compared to the PS4. Because during the early PS4 era, yes, I know the Xbox One flopped, but I'm pretty sure when these games were being made, Sony didn't know that the Xbox One was going to flop. You know, these games were probably being made before the whole Xbox One kind of fiasco happened. So they expected strong competition from Microsoft. So they put out games and games. So many great games in the PS4 generation that, I mean, they're still remastering them now, so they're still relying on those games. And it's just, you know, they were putting out games because they thought Xbox would actually compete, but then Xbox got absolutely destroyed last generation, and they haven't really recovered since. And Sony sees this, and they're like, why even bother? Why bother giving us great exclusives when we're the de facto choice, when people are just going to buy our consoles regardless? We can do whatever we want. They recently increased the prices of controllers by $5. They've been increasing the prices of their consoles, their controllers, their games, their services, and really have nothing to show for it. And it's because they can get away with it. They don't have competition. Sony has gotten complacent. They're in first place, and it's not even close. Microsoft can't even compete with them. And it's really showing how bad it's getting. And it's just really sad to see because I'm going to be honest, PlayStation is my favorite out of all of the 3. Between Xbox, Switch, Nintendo, and PlayStation, I've always been a PlayStation guy. I've grown up with PlayStation. I've had every PlayStation console. And it was just sad to see that at this point, they're so comfortable with being the top guy, with being a number, like the first place, that they're not even going to try to at least put out games for their customers. Like, say what you want about Nintendo. They're first place in the handheld market. They have no competition, but they still regularly put out games. But Sony, even though they technically do have competition, they're not even like bothering trying. Instead, they're gonna give us these crappy live services games or the 15th remastered of a PS4 game that already had a 60 FPS patch and a game that no one really was asking for or remastered for. And, it's just really like just disappointing to see. And this whole generation, in my opinion, the PS5, Series X generation, really hasn't been great. I get it. COVID happened and a lot of things got affected and, probably affected a lot of the games release dates and games probably, it affected the industry, affected how people, affected the gaming industry in general. But are we still going to use the COVID excuse now, especially when they're releasing games like Concord, absolute garbage games, but they're not releasing anything for their big guy, They canceled The Last of Us Factions, but they A-okayed Concord. And it's like, Sony knows they can get away with this because there's no one to compete. Microsoft isn't even competing. They're putting their games on PlayStation. When Indiana Jones was announced for PlayStation, I remember the release date trailer, they revealed it, and then at the end, they had a little one more thing moment, and it was just to announce that there's a PS5 version coming in 2025, early 2025, which really shows how bad it's getting for Microsoft. The fact that they're waving the white flag and putting their games on PlayStation. And it's really sad to see. I hope something happens that forces PlayStation to put out games. Like, I hope Microsoft finally starts trying to compete and actually trying to fight back against Sony and actually just release good games. Because I know a lot of these PlayStation fanboys, they want Xbox to be completely destroyed. They don't want an Xbox in the industry. But without Xbox, even look at PlayStation now with a beaten Xbox. They're so complacent. Imagine without Xbox how worse it could be. We need Xbox to be at their peak. Look at the 360 generation, PS3 generation, one of my favorite generation of consoles. And that's because both Microsoft was able to grab a huge foothold in the market. And while, yes, Sony started off weak, they started off slow, the PlayStation 3 initial launch was a disaster. They ended up beating Xbox at the end. And that's because they were releasing good games. They're releasing great games after great games. Remember, that's where we got Uncharted, Infamous, Killzone 2, Resistance, Little Big Planet. All these games, The Last of Us, all these games came out during the PlayStation 3 generation. And it's because they had competition. It's because they had someone like Microsoft with their Xbox division, with Halo, with Gears of War, with Fable, able to fight back against Sony and release great games. But now, Microsoft's unable to do that, and Sony is getting complacent. We need that Microsoft back that is able to compete with Sony. But that's all I had to say for today. I'll talk to you guys later. See ya.